We are here. Gonna give us everybody some time to get logged in. How's your day today?
Mhm.
How was your day today?
It was pretty good. I can't really
Good,
complain.
good. It finally
Just
stopped raining down here.
count down till Friday.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm.
I guess we can go ahead and get started.
Okay. We're supposed to wait about. Go ahead and start. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Beta Speaks. My name is Opal. I am here in Atlanta, and I'm currently serving on the National Programming Committee, and I'll be your moderator this evening. Our topic of conversation is a journey to equality. Equality has been at the center of every conversation as of recently, whether it be in the center of a courtroom, the middle of a college debate, or on the floors of the Senate. Everyone is talking about it. And like most, there are questions, there are myths, there's misunderstandings, and there's confusion as to what it all means for everyone. So tonight, we wanted to present you ladies with a platform where you will not only hear from individuals who are experts on the topic, but you will also be able to pose your specific questions to gain more clarification. We're going to begin by watching a short video explaining why we need the Equality Act. See if we can get that video shared real quick. Uh, while we wait on that video to queue up, let me go ahead and introduce our facilitator. I would like to introduce your evening's host, our very own soror, Miss Dacry Roan. Soror Roan is located in Nashville, Tennessee, where she serves as the Beta Mu chapter volunteer coordinator. But the list doesn't stop there. Her passion and drive for advocating for individuals who typically don't have a voice has led her to serve on many boards and committees. Most recently, she's been promoted into the Human Rights Campaign Board of Governors, which is locally in her Nashville area. And internally, she is now the Social Justice Coordinator for our very own National Programming Committee. Congratulations. I would now like to turn it over to her. Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to be discussing the Equality Act. I have the pleasure of introducing two amazing speakers. First, we have Narissa Brachaman. Her. She's an associate regional field director for the Human Rights Campaign. Narissa most recently developed and led HRC's six-figure investment in the 2019 Virginia General Assembly elections, targeting and mobilizing thousands of voters who helped elect a pro-equality majority in the House and Senate, giving the Commonwealth a Democratic trifecta for the first time in almost 3 decades. Narissa played a key campaign role in 2020 Virginia legislative session, where Virginia becoming the first in the South to pass comprehensive non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ Virginians. Prior to working at HRC, Narissa led fieldwork in the South for 8 years for progressive candidates, state legislator, congressional, and gubernatorial. Through her passion for voter registration, voting rights, and equal access to the polls, Narissa hopes to make the ballot box accessible to all. She is originally from Barbados, but was raised in Florida and has slowly been making her way up the East Coast. Narissa currently resides in Richmond, Virginia, with her partner and her 3 new houseplants. Our next speaker is going to be Shanika Nicki Harris. They is a queer gender nonconforming attorney, activist, and speaker. She is a native of Tallahassee, Florida, and obtained her undergraduate degree in political science from Florida A&M University and her law degree from Florida State University. She is licensed to practice law in Florida and Washington, D.C. Nick is the Director of Strategic Outreach and Engagement for the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. Previously, Nick was appointed by Commissioner Nicki Fried, as the first LGBTQ director to a member of the Florida cabinet. They have served in Florida as a senior attorney, prosecutor, and public defender. She was the first Black woman elected as vice chair of the HRC Board of Governors, serves on the board of Ruth's List, the Broward County Sheriff's Social Justice Task Force, the Broward State Attorney's Advisory Council, and is big in the Big and Brother Sisters Pride program. Nick is certified by Cornell University in Diversity and Inclusion and was a 2020 Victory Empowerment Fellow. She founded Thou Art, a signature open mic event with her friend and fellow attorney G. Wright. The event series celebrates LGBTQ women and their allies through performance and visual art. Nick is the recipient of countless awards, including the 2019 Ruth's List Women Breaking the Glass Ceiling Award and the 2020 LGBTQ Leadership Award by the Florida Diversity Council. She is an award-winning Toastmaster and speaks across the country in support of equality.
Thank you for that.
I'm so happy to have both of you here with us tonight. I think we have a video, but
it's okay. We can move on.
Another second, no video. Okay.
We can always pause and come back to the video. I think we're pretty fluid, so.
We can. Well, the Equality Act is a bill in the United States Congress that, if passed, it would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in employment, housing, public accommodations, public education, federal funding, credit, and the jury system. As of 2020, 29 states have not outlawed anti-LGBTQ discrimination, with members of the LGBTQ community being given very little protection at the national level. 2/3 of LGBTQ Americans in the United States have reported facing or experiencing discrimination in their personal lives. The Equality Act seeks to remedy this lack of protection, applying existing state and anti-LGBTQ discrimination laws nationwide. So we have some questions that we're going to go ahead and dive into to provide more clarity for our community. The first question is going to be for you, Narissa, is what is the Equality Act and who and what protections will be covered under the Equality Act?
Yeah, this is a great question. If you see me looking off a little bit, I've got notes here because it's so nuanced. I want to make sure that I'm capturing everything. And there's just a lot of information because this bill is so comprehensive. A lot of folks think it's just going to impact LGBTQ people, but this is a great bill that's going to do a lot for a lot of folks. So, the Equality Act is federal legislation, like you said, that would modernize our nation's civil rights laws by including explicit protections for LGBTQ people, as well as improving protections for women, people of color, and people of all faiths. So currently, as you said, our civil rights laws currently protect people on the basis of race, color, national origin, and in most cases, sex, disability, and religion. But federal law right now does not explicitly provide protections based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And it actually includes a few loopholes that result in discrimination against women, people of color, and people of faith. So what the Equality Act would do as law would help ensure fair and equal treatment for everyone by extending federal protections in a lot of different areas that we sometimes may not even think that we're being discriminated against in, such as something important to all of us is jury service. I know we're all really looking forward to serving, on juries, but LGBTQ people can actually be turned away from that because of who we are. Also important things like housing, accessing credit, education, public places and services, also including federally funded programs. So, additionally, the Equality Act is also going to offer stronger discrimination protections for people of color, women, and people of all faiths by updating the public spaces and services covered in current law to include places like retail stores, services such as banks and legal services, transportation services, and like I mentioned, other federally funded programs. So, to put it all like a bow on it, the Equality Act is going to ensure that everyone in America, including LGBTQ people, are protected from harassment and discrimination.
Awesome. Something I read about that I hadn't even really thought about, like you're saying with services, is like when you go to the dry cleaners, how men and women, they may be charged different prices. So things like that, that never even crossed my mind. I don't go to the dry cleaners very much. That never even crossed my mind. So I think that just knowing that, people knowing that gives them even more initiative to urge this to be passed.
Yeah, definitely.
Real quick, if I can interject, for all of our viewers, if you guys do have questions that you want to pose, we do have a time for that. But as you're thinking about them, or if you hear somebody say something that you'd like, may come up with a scenario or just whatever, put the questions in the comment box, and then when we get to that space, we'll ask them for you so that they can answer them.
So our next question is, which I think you kind of answered this a little bit, but why is the Equality Act necessary?
Yeah, well, like you mentioned earlier, 29 states don't have any protections for LGBTQ people from discrimination. And so we can really think about our country as sort of like a patchwork of laws. I'm currently living in Richmond, Virginia, where as of last year, we have non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people. But if I travel to, say, West Virginia or Tennessee or North Carolina, any of these states bordering where I live now, I don't have any protections. So many, I think it's about 2/3 of LGBTQ people have reported experiencing discrimination in their personal lives. And the Equality Act would really just level the playing field for everyone, guaranteeing that LGBTQ people are extended the same federal anti-discrimination protections that others in the United States have enjoyed for decades. But I think we're missing a moment if we don't talk about really what's happening in state legislatures right now. So let's first talk about like the support for equality that's out there. More than 70% of people in this nation support equality, and over 2/3 of people oppose discriminatory anti-LGBTQ legislation. But as you may know, if you've watched the news or if you're following along in what's happening in your state legislature, you're seeing a lot of lawmakers who have really missed that memo that support for equality is there. They're being egged on by extremists and other anti-equality lawmakers. And we're seeing states trying to use our community as political pawns. So 2021 has officially surpassed 2015 as by far the worst year for anti-LGBTQ legislation. And the majority of these bills targets, the rights and lives of an already vulnerable population, which are trans youth. So, by further stigmatizing trans people, these bills that we're seeing in state legislatures pop up are really fueling the same stigma, driving a wave of anti-trans violence that is devastating our community as well. So I say that all to say that the Equality Act, the bill that's moving through Congress that we're waiting on for a vote in the Senate, would be an important backstop to those bills that I just mentioned, the bills attacking our community. And it would finally ensure that, LGBTQ people are fully protected under federal law. So that's why, the Equality Act is so necessary, is that lives are at stake. And while some states are choosing to, chip away at our livelihood, we need those protections at the federal level.
If I could also actually sort of add to that, Marissa, awesome answer in it. As you were talking about where you live, I can't help but be reminded that I'm sitting right here in the state of Florida. I know some of your founders are right here from this state. And so when we start to talk about how serious this is, I can't drive this state, let alone the country, without trying to figure out what does that look like. If I have to be worried about myself or my partner, driving across the country, we have to be concerned about where we stop. What possible risk if I place myself in, what rights do I have or don't I have? And that doesn't make sense. It shouldn't happen in our state. It definitely shouldn't be happening across the country. And I'm so glad there was sort of talked about the fact that right now we're seeing this massive assault against our transgender community, right? Right here in the state of Florida, we had the anti-trans sports bill passed. We're now going way back and bringing back bathroom bills. You know, we love to say, let people pee in peace. But what we know is that what they try to do is continue to come after our community. And one of the things that I just want to share as somebody with HRC who works a lot of prides, is out in community, I think sometimes our community gets comfortable. Number one, when we start, you know, I do you know how many times I am at Pride and people come up and they go, well, what else do we have to do? We have marriage equality, right? And how long ago were we just saying, right, you could be married on Friday and fired on Monday? And then Bostock happened. And we were able to say, okay, the Bostock Supreme Court decision happened saying, you know, we will consider sex, that protected class, to include sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. But then what about all the other accommodations that Arissa named? What about housing? What about credit? What about jury service? What about public accommodations? And although we can read Bostock to include that because the Biden administration has said that's how they're going to interpret it, I don't know about y'all, but the last person that was in the White House was a fool. So I don't need the next one to be a fool, okay? So we want to make sure that whoever comes next, there's legislation in place to keep protecting us, because we have to remember all of this matters, right? That was a court that interpreted that case looks very different than the court that we're dealing with now, right? Rest in peace to RBG. And we think about what would those decisions look like in the future. So we are closer, it feels like, than ever with the opportunity to literally pass the Equality Act, but we cannot do that without the folks on this call and without the humans. I love people. One of the people that works at HRC says all the time, there's no human rights campaign without the humans, right? So we're relying on the folks listening tonight to be able to say to their, you know, calling their senators, right? It's passed in the House. We need you to get on the phone and call your senators and let them know how important this is. We need you to letter write. We need you to go into these offices, because the truth is people's lives are at stake, right? When we start talking about people who are denied employment, denied housing, can be kicked out of public accommodations. I mean, all of this matters. And I also think and say all the time that if we would just legislate for the Black trans woman, we would all be okay. Because the truth is, we've got to care most about the folks in the margins, and we know who those folks are. We see it happening right now with the assault on our transgender community. And then when you add race, you only multiply the discrimination that they're facing. So, I mean, this is really the fight in front of us and what we have to be attacking right now. We can't wait for tomorrow. We've got to get the Equality Act passed now.
Well said. I was thinking of all the things when you were talking, but I didn't add anything else to that because well said perfectly. In Tennessee, I think we had 5 bills passed this session. So yes, nothing else need to be said. I agree.
And vote these folks out of office. But that's for a look. Wait a minute. I'm like, vote them out. I mean, because
yes.
this is not what folks asked you to do. It's not. I think about in our state where we just came out of a pandemic. Are we still even out of it? We're coming out of a pandemic, a time when folks are losing their lives and jobs. And this is what our legislatures across the country think is important, to be picking on and bullying kids about playing sports. And it's literally a solution in search of a problem, right? There was no issue. The fact that my governor, I don't want to be Florida specific, but let's be real. My governor waited to sign this anti-trans sports bill on the first day of Pride. He claims it was because he needed to wait for the one plaintiff they could find in the country to come into Florida. Well, that right there was the problem. You couldn't even find anybody in Florida for the legislation you're passing. And so there's no place for hate and discrimination. So we need to call these folks out and then do our part, picking up the phone, letter writing, and getting out there and making sure we vote, and take 10 other people to vote with you.
Amen. The next question we have for you, Nick, is how will this affect the education our children receive in schools in regards to the LGBTQ community, and what schools are protected under the Equality Act?
Now, honestly, I will have to ask on some of this, Narissa, for some help on the educational piece. I could tell you right now, before I hand that over, is the fact that we just passed another law talking about what teachers can teach in school. It's a fight already to learn our history in the state of Florida. You can opt out of Black history. You can opt out of LGBTQ history. This is crazy. History is history. We don't get the right to opt in and out of facts. We don't get to create separate histories. And I don't know why we would be teaching any of our kids to hate. My hope is that we're going to pass the Equality Act and they'll learn about this just like we learned about the Civil Rights Act. And they'll be talking about folks like you and Arissa and myself and Opal and talking about what we did to make sure this was passed, just like we talk about Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Malcolm X and all the folks that played their part in passing the Civil Rights Act. We're just expanding on that. And I hope that's what we're going to teach our kids. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Narissa, for specifics.
Yeah, no problem, Nick.
I bet we'll have a chapter in the books.
So yeah, how does the Equality Act, reach school? I mean, we think about it in terms of, we don't want to be evicted from where we're living because of who we are or denied access to lines of credit, et cetera. But, the Equality Act will also, positively impact schools, and so any school that's receiving federal funding would not be able to discriminate against students or prospective or current employees. So you think of educators who might be openly LGBTQ or, maybe not. The Equality Act is going to prohibit that school from discrimination because they're receiving federal funds. So that means that schools can't say that they're going to discriminate against an educator because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that, comes in terms of if they're going to hire someone or for reasons they may terminate employment or even, a reason for promotion as well. What does it mean for our trans students? As Nick mentioned, a lot of what's happening in these state legislatures right now are solutions in search of a problem. These problems with trans students accessing locker rooms, bathrooms, being able to play in sports, those problems don't exist. So the Equality Act will codify current law, ensuring that trans students are treated, consistent with their gender identity, including when, accessing those places like locker rooms and restroom facilities. And what is it going to mean for just students in generally? It's going to, again, prohibit discrimination against LGBTQ youth. So, that's bullying, harassment, whether it's happening from other youth or by educators and staff. So it's going to do a whole lot, even for our schools, for our students, for our educators, so that we can make, learning environments for students wholly inclusive and safe and, allowing them to grow up to be, good stewards for the world and not have to worry about, hiding who they are in their classroom, whether they're up at the front or sitting in a seat at the back.
Marissa, if I could also just sort of piggyback, you said something so true, and I don't want people to think like the legislatures, we don't have hypothetical cases, we have real cases. You can Google right now. I can tell you in the state of Florida, because I've spoken to this teacher, a teacher who was teaching, posted wedding pictures with her same-sex partner and came to school that Monday and was fired, right? And those are real cases that are being litigated and folks that, are being targeted. So when we talk about why this stuff matters, that's why it matters, because these are real situations that are actually happening to folks. And then I want to say this only because I know so many beautiful, amazing, smart, talented Black women in your organization. And I just think about, sometimes I've heard folks in our own community say, well, I have nothing to do with this issue on, the anti-trans legislation. And what does that have to do with me? Here's what I ask people. You should care anytime, number one, any group is being discriminated against. But when we take legislation like is happening in the state of Florida, that anti-transgender sports ban, where they're saying you would have to produce your birth certificate, original birth certificate, if someone even accuses you of being trans. Now, stay with me for a second. Who do we know has been attacked for her body? Who do we know plays sports right now and is incredible? How many times have we heard about Serena? You know, what she looks like, what her body looks like. So I often go, when I start to hear this stuff, I go, they coming for us, right? It's Black women where, you know, the way we talk about Black women and their bodies, I go, who is this going to apply to? Who can walk? So who's going to actually say, oh, well, I'm not sure. And so decides who's going to be producing original birth certificates. Like, can we stop and think for a second how crazy this is? And when we think that, like, they try and act like we're so out there and so crazy, and I'm going, do y'all realize the original legislation with that had that they were going to do genital checks? Like, let that sink in for a moment. That was the original part of that bill, and that you saw across the country, is that someone was going to do genital checks on children. I wish they would. Y'all, I mean, I don't even.
After lawsuit after lawsuit.
Right, that is exactly why HRC is filing a lawsuit in the state of Florida. And I look forward to where else we're going to make those challenges. But I go, y'all, I would need a lawyer if they came trying to do a genital search on my child. Like, that's crazy. Yeah. But this is how far these folks have gone. And if we sit back and we're silent, you see what's happening. Like, they're taking away, we see voter suppression. We see these crazy anti-trans laws. They're coming back with this old stuff. It's the same repeat. But if we aren't doing our part to keep our eye on the ball and following and letting folks know that they're going to be accountable when this happens, then we haven't done our part. Like, right now, I keep saying this, we have to be the freedom fighters. We are the civil rights activists of our time that have to stand in the gap. I mean this respectfully. Dr. King not here, right? Medgar gone. You know, Coretta is gone. All of these folks are gone. And I go, so we're dependent upon ourselves. We have to look in the mirror and say, what are we willing to do? And if you look back and this Equality Act doesn't pass, and you can't say to yourself, I ain't make a phone call, I ain't wrote a letter. Come on now. I couldn't sleep with that.
Mm-hmm. Preach. Our next question is for Narissa. Are religious entities covered under the Equality Act?
Yes. So, it's the Equality Act. There's so many misconceptions about the Equality Act and what it's going to do for religious institutions or entities, et cetera, et cetera. I first want to say that the Equality Act has broad support from faith leaders of all faiths from around the country. Support from Muslim leaders, Baptist leaders, Catholic leaders. The support for it is there. The short story, because I think what the other side wants is they want us to lean into this debate with them to think that Equality Act is going to threaten religion or, threaten your freedom to practice your own religion. And so I'm just going to keep it short and sweet. The Equality Act is not going to and does not change religious exemptions that are already in place in federal law. So if there is a religious entity that is currently exempt, it's going to remain exempt. And that's in regard to, expressing a preference for people of their faith in employment under certain sections, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't need to get into the legalese about anything or sections of the code, et cetera. But, the Equality Act is not a threat to religion. It's not a threat to churches or how you practice faith or whatever God you worship, or if you don't, that is there to stay. And as whatever's in place now in federal law, in terms of religious exemptions, the Equality Act is not going to change it.
Thank you for that. Our next question is for Nick. What should one do if they feel that their rights have been what should one do if they feel that their rights under the Equality Act have been violated?
Well, let me say this, that's part of it. Our rights are limited. I mean, seriously, when we think, that's why we're talking about the importance of passing the Equality Act. I can tell you, when Narissa has talked about sort of the patchwork that's happening, we still have protections, but I say to people often when I go, I was in tears, y'all, when Bostock decision came down. But I also was like, do you know how difficult it is to prove like employment discrimination? Most people are not crazy enough to fire you and be like, you gay, get up out of here. Like, who does that? That really doesn't happen. So when I think about, but there are situations, and I don't want to discourage folks, but I can tell you across the state, you have a lot of human rights commissions. You can still seek civil litigation if you feel like you've been the target of discrimination. There are resources, whether it's through reaching out and potentially contacting HRC or any local organizations. I often send people in the state of Florida, y'all, that's where I live, even though I'm with HRC, the Florida Commission on Human Relations, whether that's sometimes reaching out to other organizations that sort of do this work, ACLU, you name them. There are places that we can go, but again, you are hitting on the importance of the Equality Act. I mean, that's sort of why I go, we want to codify the fact that you will have recourse in case you are discriminated against. But a lot of this at times can be difficult to prove. And again, you're relying on a patchwork. Narissa, I see you. Please feel free to jump in on that one too.
No, you're the attorney in this group, so yeah, you'll know better. But you're right. It's like, this is why we need the Equality Act, so that if these situations do happen, we have the laws on our side. We have a recourse for action. We have the protections in place, and it makes it harder for the folks doing the discriminating to run with it. I think, Nick, you hit on all those major points. I think it depends on what sort of discrimination you're facing. If you're in a school, you've got, local school boards or, the school itself. I think it really depends, but there are local organizations. There are national organizations like HRC that are here to help folks figure those things out if it gets there. But, the ultimate goal is that we don't want it to get there. We want to have all of these legal protections so that we can just go on and live our lives and walk out the door the way we want to walk out.
Yeah, I was going to add as well, you can always reach out to legal services locally. And please know, a lot of places where we live may have city and county ordinances or rules that prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity. So again, it really depends on where you live and sort of reaching out to certain governmental entities or other agencies that do work in these areas.
That's a really good point, because I know here in Tennessee is ridiculous, like Florida, but in Nashville, it's a little better here. There's certain protections that are in place. So that's a good point. Looking at your city too versus just not only just your state laws.
I have a question for you guys, and it's one that I tend to ask on a lot of platforms, because when this person posed it to me, it kind of threw me off, right? So I've been advocating for a while. I'm always, everybody needs to be involved, et cetera, et cetera. And I've had one young lady say, but I'm not your poster child. I just want to live my life. It's hard as it is being who I feel like I am in this world, right? So when you encounter people who are, just wanting to live their life as they are, who they are, how do you try to promote, or what do you say to try to get them to kind of want to be involved? Or do you just, okay, well, I respect it and move on? Like, as far as promoting this fight, promoting people wanting or helping people want to get involved, like, what do you say as far as that aspect?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I always say is that your personal story is the most powerful thing you have. There's no one who can deny that, change that, challenge it. that's you and that's your story. And I think personal stories and who we are as people are the biggest way we have to make changes at the policy level. Lawmakers, we think get tied up in statistics or numbers or things like that, but really what's going to move them along, what's going to change hearts and mind, is hearing from their constituents and hearing those stories about how a certain piece of legislation like the Equality Act is going to make their life better, or sharing the discrimination you're currently facing. So I think, my advice, and I'm an organizer, so I love to give people three things they can do to pass the Equality Act, to join in the fight, is one, talk with your friends and family. If you're an openly LGBTQ person and you feel comfortable sharing your personal story with a neighbor or a friend, let them know. Share your story. Educate others on your life and how this bill would positively impact you. Two, as Nick mentioned, we're not going to get this bill through unless we have 60 senators that vote for it. So regardless of where you are living, if you're living in a state like, New York with Chuck Schumer, or you're living in a state like Florida with Marco Rubio, your senators need to hear from you. And we won't get to, saving the conversation about Marco Rubio is a whole other panel that we don't have time to get into. But, your senators need to hear from constituents. They need to see that folks living in their state support equality, that they support this bill. That's what's going to move them along, and attaching your personal story to it. And, three is just keep calling your senators every day. You don't have a limit on how many times you can call them. Call them every day until this bill is brought up for a vote. There are, legislative aides and staff in these offices that are making tallies for every call they receive for certain bills. And I can tell you that opponents of equality and opponents of the Equality Act are driving a lot of calls into these offices, and these senators need to hear the good stuff, to know that support and enthusiasm for this bill is there and that it's not losing steam.
I was just going to add really quickly, Opal, to that. For the people who say, I don't want to be your poster child, everything isn't for everybody. That's what Jill Scott told us in the song. If you really feel that adamant that you don't have a part to play, that's for you to deal with the person you wake up and see in the mirror. I know that folks came before me, which is why I have the rights that I have right now. So that's a personal responsibility that I have. But I also go, look, as people of color, as Black folks, it's traumatic, right? Living in this country, waking up, doing this work. Not everybody is built like that, right? I think about, what's her name that we're supporting, when she just pulled out of the tennis match and she was like, I can't. I don't criticize folks for that, right? You have to know what you can do for yourself. And if you can go to sleep at night and feel like I'm okay watching other people fight for my rights, I don't have the time to convince you otherwise. And while we focused on that person, is 20 more people ready to join the fight and can be inspired if you will share your story, just like Narissa talked about. So I go, don't get too caught up with the folks who aren't at a space and place. You pray for them, lead them to go do their thing, and hope that when they see you and your deeds, they'll be inspired into the work. And if not, they owe you thanks later for the rights that you fought for them. But you can't make people do something they don't want to do. And it's enough folks like you all, like betas, who are ready to step in and do the work. And we welcome that, and we will get it done. Who would have believed that a woman born in the Deep South was going to turn a red state to blue? Before there was Stacey Abrams, what, right? We wouldn't have believed there was a Stacey Abrams. So if Stacey had been worried about all the people who didn't want to do something, we wouldn't have President Biden right now. So I say to people, everybody, where's your Stacey? Black women all over this country doing this work. We can do it. Don't worry about the person next to you. Worry about the person in the mirror.
Absolutely. So we have about 5 more minutes, but before we wrap up, if you can get 60 seconds, we have 2 questions we want to ask real quick. All right, you need a timer? I can set a timer. First question: how is the Equality Act related to the same-sex marriage bill Obama passed? Anybody? Or similarities, if you can think of any.
I mean, the similarities, I think it's on the road to full equality. You know, I think of Stonewall when black and brown trans women, threw bricks and started Pride as a protest. Back then, they were not thinking about marriage equality. We just got there first. And I think, Nick touched upon this earlier, is that, the fight for LGBTQ equality did not end at marriage equality. So this is, those are great rights that we've achieved through, thankfully amazing Supreme Court decisions. But this is a much broader, impactful bill that's going to drastically change our lives. Like, to know that we don't have to, pick a zip code to live in based on the protections that are there. We want to be able to move freely around this country, like everyone else.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say marriage equality happened because we changed hearts and minds, person by person. Keep sharing your story. You don't know who needs to hear it. I share all the time. My parents were homophobes before their daughter came out, and now they're allies. So we have to keep sharing those stories. And in the same way we got marriage equality, we will pass the Equality Act.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, that's going to be it. We're going to get these questions to you guys, and we're going to get the answers to the guests that were here today, because we don't want to leave anybody out. And I definitely appreciate you guys for coming on and taking this time with us. Zachary?
Yes, this was an amazing discussion. I echo Opal. I greatly appreciate both of you guys taking your time this evening to talk to us about this, because it's such an important topic, and it's going to really take all of us to get this passed.
Absolutely. Thank you for all the work Betas are doing. We love these kinds of discussions, and y'all do amazing work. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And just one plug, go to hrc.org/Equality Act. You will have 4 actions that you can take right now to help, move this bill forward in the Senate.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, y'all.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.